That night, the sky over Lydia was silent. In the royal palace, tension hung in the air like a fog that refused to lift. In the great council chamber, royal advisors and temple priests sat cross-legged, staring at the war map spread across a stone table. The king gazed out the window at the flickering stars. Everyone was waiting for one man, Thales of Miletus. The king had heard the rumors, a philosopher, an astronomer, a star sorcerer, who could supposedly read the signs of the heavens. But tonight was not about philosophy. It was about life and death and about the coming war against media. When Thales finally entered, every eye turned to him. He carried no sword, only papyrus, a stylus, and faith in the sky. Thales walked to the large window, eyes fixed on the moonlit heavens. He began to explain the movements of celestial bodies, the cycles of eclipses. That had nothing to do with the will of the gods. The priests whispered, calling him arrogant, but Thales did not waver. The sky will grow dark at midday, he said quietly. And when it happens, fate itself will pause. The room stiffened. How could a man predict the will of the heavens? Yet the king chose to listen. That night, a seed was planted, a collision between old faith and new knowledge. The day came. Thousands of Lydian and Median soldiers stood face to face on the battlefield. Swords drawn, spears ready, war cries filled the air. Above them, the sun shone brightly, until suddenly the light began to fade. A shadow crept slowly across the land. The sun was being eaten, an eclipse. On the front line, soldiers faltered. Priests screamed. "The gods are enraged," they shouted. But Thales stood calmly at the edge of the battlefield, his eyes fixed on the sky. To him, this was no divine wrath. It was a cycle he had calculated. As the light vanished and the world was plunged into daytime darkness, both armies froze in terror. Swords lowered. War cries died. Silence fell. At that moment, Thales proved that his prophecy was not magic. It was knowledge. He was no oracle. He was a watcher of the stars. The King of Lydia stared at Thales wide-eyed. For the first time, a king witnessed that destiny could be known without prayer. History would never be the same. 3 nights had passed since the sun went dark at noon. Yet the King of Lydia could not sleep. He sat on the palace balcony, gazing into the empty sky. What had happened that day was more than an eclipse. It was the first crack in the wall of his own beliefs. A man who had always listened to the words of priests had just seen a mortal read the heavens more accurately than any oracle. The priests grew restless, whispering of betrayal against the gods. They urged the king to imprison Thales. But the king hesitated. There was something in the way Thales spoke, calm, certain, unlike a trickster. While others panicked, Thales had stood firm. It made the king question, who truly understood the world, the priests or the philosopher? He summoned Thales to the throne room. "You made the sun go out," the king said. Thales shook his head slowly. "Not I, your majesty. The heavens move in their pattern. I merely studied the pattern." The king fell silent. A new idea, frightening yet alluring, took root in his mind. Perhaps the world was not entirely ruled by the gods. Beneath his fear, a spark of admiration grew. Thales had not just changed how the king looked at the sky. He had changed how the king saw power. If a man could understand the movement of the heavens, perhaps a ruler should listen not only to prayers but to reason. News of the eclipse Thales had predicted spread like wildfire. For centuries, temple priests had been the bridge between mortals and gods. Now, a foreigner from Miletus had stolen that power in a single afternoon. A great council was held at Lydia's main temple. Statues of the gods towered over the robed priests in black and gold. "This man is dangerous," the high priest declared. "If people trust their own minds, who will still bow to the temple?" Murmurs of agreement filled the hall. But one young priest dared to ask, what if Thales is right? What if the heavens do have a pattern? Silence fell like a blade. For some priests, this was blasphemy. For others, it was the sign of changing times. Thales did not fight with insults or threats. He walked into the temple with his papyrus covered in calculations. He spoke of cycles, solar paths, and measured time. Some mocked him. Others felt their certainty falter, for his logic was difficult to deny. This was no longer just about an eclipse. It was about who had the right to interpret the world, myth or reason. The story of the man who darkened the sun spread through the streets of Lydia. In the markets, spice merchants whispered. Fishermen looked at the night sky differently. Slaves told children about the wise man who could read the stars. Thales walked through the city unguarded. He was neither noble, priest, nor king, yet his name was spoken more often than the gods of war or harvest. Ordinary people, once terrified of heavenly omens, began to believe that the world could be understood. To them, this was more than knowledge. It was hope. An old fisherman approached Thales and asked how he knew the eclipse would come. Thales didn't answer with complex formulas. He drew a simple triangle in the dirt, showed the shadow, explained the sun's path. The people marveled, not at magic, but at simplicity. That was the true power of knowledge, making the grand feel graspable. As the story passed from mouth to mouth, the first generation of commoners began to look up at the sky, not with fear, but with curiosity. But not everyone rejoiced. Senior priests and nobles began to see Thales as a threat to the old order. They knew that if people trusted logic, temple voices would no longer be absolute. In secret rooms at night, they whispered plans. "He must be stopped," said one noble. "If not, the people will turn to the king, or worse, to themselves." This was no war of swords, but of influence. Meanwhile, Thales continued teaching at the harbor, unaware of how deeply his words were shaking the foundations of power. To him, this was truth. To rulers, it was revolution. Tension grew in the city. Spies followed Thales. Priests spread rumors of a star sorcerer. Yet Thales walked calmly, trusting that knowledge could not be destroyed by slander. At the harbor of Miletus, far from the temple's control, Thales gathered his students under the open sky. He pointed to constellations, Orion, Ursa, the Pleiades. "The sky is not angry," he said. "The sky simply moves." His students, not only nobles but fishermen, merchants, even slaves, wrote eagerly. In the darkness, the sound of waves accompanied the first lessons on reason and the cosmos. Thales took a stick and drew circles and triangles in the wet sand, explaining how the sun, moon, and earth moved in order. "If we can understand it," he said, "then we need not fear." That night, knowledge was no longer the property of temples or palaces. It belonged to anyone willing to look up. From that moment, the first seeds of independent thought were sown. Back in the palace, pressure mounted. Priests urged the king to act. "If this knowledge spreads," the high priest warned, "the temple will lose its voice. The people will follow the stars, not the gods." Nobles too feared change. But the king remembered the day the sky darkened, not because of divine warning, but because of Thales. He could not deny what he had witnessed. The royal council was loud and divided. Priests wanted Thales exiled or punished. Nobles wanted him silenced politically. The king, however, remained quiet. He knew this was no longer about one man. It was about the kingdom's future. He summoned Thales privately. "No priests, no nobles, just a ruler and a philosopher." "You have shaken my power," said the king. "But you have also shown me beyond these palace walls." Thales neither bowed nor challenged him. "I do not fight the king," he said. "I fight fear." His words echoed through the stone chamber. The king walked to the window, gazing at the night sky. He knew the world was changing. To side with the temple was to preserve the old power. To side with knowledge was to open a dangerous but bright path. He made a bold choice, to protect Thales in secret. He would not worship knowledge, but he would not burn it either. History often changes not with swords, but with such quiet acts of courage. Years later, that eclipse was still retold, from market stalls to harbors, from temples to schools. People called it the Eclipse of Thales, not because he caused the darkness, but because for the first time, darkness was explained. Thales was long gone, but his ideas endured. His students carried his teachings to other cities. What had once been divine wrath became proof that the world followed patterns. Patterns could be learned. Knowledge could conquer fear. In many places, priests still fumed and nobles remained suspicious. But the seed of reason had been planted, and no power could ever fully uproot it again. From a single eclipse, a new chapter in human history began.